Hey guys, my name is Aaron and welcome back to MindScience episode 7. In this video, I would like to explore what is probably the most fundamental teaching in non-dual spirituality, which is the idea that the self is an illusion. The self that we take ourselves to be doesn't actually exist apart from our ideas about it. And I'd like to speak more objectively about this truth today to make it as practical as possible so that we can really understand what the nature of suffering is and how we can overcome it through awareness. And so I'd like to begin by telling you an ancient Zen parable. Once there was a Chinese farmer, and one day while he was farming, one of his horses got loose and ran away. His neighbors gathered around and said, "Isn't that unfortunate?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." The next day his horse returned to the farm, but had brought 7 more wild horses with him. His neighbors gathered around again and said, "Isn't that just wonderful?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." On the following day his son was training the new horses how to ride, and one of them kicked him off and broke his leg. The neighbors once again gathered around and said, "Isn't that just awful?" And the farmer once again said, "Maybe." A few weeks later, a military officer came by for the draft and demanded to see the oldest son. When the farmer brought him out, the officer saw that he was unfit for battle, removed his name from the draft, and went on to the next house. The neighbors came by again and said, "Isn't that fortunate?" And again the farmer replied, "Maybe." And so the idea behind this parable is that we never actually know the most accurate interpretation of anything that happens to us. We often cry and moan about something that's happening, but later down the road, it becomes something that we are deeply grateful for, even though it was difficult at the time. And likewise, some of the best things we ever thought could happen to us wind up being some of the worst things that ever happened to us. So the mind is always in a rush to form a conclusion about our experiences. It seeks to constantly fabricate an illusory sense of control over life. And it creates this false sense of control by pretending like it actually knows what anything means, which is, of course, impossible. And so this is the essence of what living from acceptance means. It is a state of inner alignment with life, because you realize that you don't actually know anything, and so resisting it is completely futile. When we accept whatever life brings us and simply do the best with it that we can, there is always something good to be gained from it. But when we resist life for any reason, we create needless suffering, and we often miss the invaluable lessons that the universe is trying to teach us. I'll tell you a quick personal story. I had my first realization of this truth many years ago when I was going through a painful breakup. I woke up in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. and I just felt this subtle sense of joy. I was just feeling really grateful for my life and where I was headed, and so I laid there for a couple of minutes just feeling really happy. And then suddenly, a thought appeared in my mind. "You just went through a painful breakup, remember? Oh, think about everything you lost. Don't you miss her? What if you never find someone again who makes you this happy?" And so I spent about 10 minutes tossing and turning over these thoughts until it finally occurred to me that just a few moments ago I was laying here with all this joy, but then a thought appeared and I was back in the grip of depression again. The breakup had still happened a few moments ago, but because I wasn't mentally rehearsing it, there was no suffering. And so I saw clearly in that moment that it is my mind that creates all of my suffering. The problem is never in reality. The problem is always in my interpretation of reality. Here's a quick breakdown on the mechanics of suffering. Our 7 energy centers are basically our internal guidance system to our thoughts. So when we think certain types of thoughts, these energy centers will vibrate in a chaotic pattern, which creates a negative emotion. When we think other types of thoughts, these energy centers vibrate in a harmonious pattern, which creates a positive emotion. So the question is, what types of thoughts dictate which polarity of vibration gets created? And the answer is simple. Thoughts which are correct or incorrect. That's it. Emotions are the barometer of the universe that is letting us know how in or out of alignment each thought is with reality. And that's why suffering always feels bad, because suffering is literally an incorrect thought. I never suffer from what happens to me. I suffer because I see what is not there. If someone insults you behind your back, but you never know about it, do you suffer? The answer is obviously no. That's because, in a very real sense, the insult never actually happened. You didn't experience it, which means that there was no illusory self to suffer from it. You are indivisibly one with everything that you experience. There is not 1 millimeter of your life experience that you can be separated from. The experience and the experiencer are one. In the same way that the knife and its cutting are one, or the scale and its weighing are one. There is no cutting apart from the knife and no weighing apart from the scale. Likewise, there is no unitary self which is carried from moment to moment. Your sense of self changes with every experience that you have. That is because you are what you experience. The way you are interpreting your life in any given second is the surest reflection of who you are in that moment. When the idea collapses that a personal self is experiencing something, there is just life flowing and the universe in motion, and you feel your sense of self as indivisibly one with life. This is what is often referred to as cosmic consciousness. When the separate self is seen to be a complete sham, you are one with everything, and oneness cannot suffer. You can only suffer from the idea of separation. This is what is meant in spirituality when we say that the self is an illusion. There is no thinker apart from thoughts, and there is no experiencer apart from experience. They are one. So if you believe that you are suffering, you are believing an illusion. How can we be sure? Because if you remove the idea that's causing the suffering, then the sufferer goes with it. It's a projection that only exists to the extent that it is invested with belief. You are essentially holding on to a hot potato and saying, I am a hot potato. But you can release it at any moment. Some thoughts are so significant to us, while to another person they mean nothing. For example, the thought I am fat, which torments someone who is overweight, means nothing to someone who is fit and in shape. So which person has the correct viewpoint of that thought? The answer is neither, because it does not exist. This is an ancient truth that all world religions have spoken of for thousands of years. You may have heard it before, but its reality has not yet taken root in your heart. But when this truth finally clicks for you, it will become your gateway into heaven. Your final liberation from suffering comes with the realization that we do not suffer from what happens to us. We suffer from what we think about it. The reason your breakup stops hurting you after a long amount of time has passed is because you changed your perspective about it. You went from thinking, oh my God, how can I live without them? To, I'm really grateful that it played out the way that it did because it made me a stronger person in the long run, and it helped me to find someone that I'm actually much happier with now. So, who was suffering the breakup to begin with? The answer is nobody. There never was an independent sufferer apart from the thoughts. It was always a type of hallucination. And if we want to be frank, it's actually a form of insanity. An insanity that every human alive at our current stage of evolution currently suffers from. But we are in the process of evolving out of it. The very fact that this video exists is indicative of that. But the fact that every human suffers from this insanity currently doesn't change the truth of reality, which is that the idea, the suffering, and the sufferer are one. It is the unholy trinity of the ego. Now, this is not to diminish anyone's life experience, but only to say that you misinterpreted it, just as anyone else would have in your position who wasn't already enlightened. There are levels to spiritual awakening because there are levels to reality. And we have to peel back each layer one by one until we can finally see what is true, which is that you are eternal, formless consciousness. Your essence is beyond harm. Nothing can ever hurt you unless you allow it, by believing that you are weak and fragile. But you don't suffer from your nightmares once you awaken. You don't even need to transcend them. You simply see their unreality. And please don't take this as a permission slip to tell all of your friends, your suffering is an illusion, it doesn't actually exist, it's only the idea you're suffering from. Everyone must come to this realization on their own timing. It cannot be forced on anyone. We still need to allow people to feel what they're feeling, because that is where they are. Nobody can see above their current state of consciousness. But what you can do is urge them to begin questioning their experience. Ask them if they are really suffering from what happened or from their interpretation of what happened. Ask them if there might be a higher way of viewing this situation, and let them do the investigation themselves. All you need is awareness. When the true self sees a thought that is creating suffering, it naturally moves itself away. In the same way that when you place your hand in a fire, your hand naturally jerks itself away. So all that you need to do is continually become aware of what thoughts are creating suffering. And in doing this, you will slowly begin to drain them of power. Now, this is not just a one-time realization you have, but this is a daily spiritual practice called self-inquiry. It is one that is meditative and contemplative. The more we begin to question the nature of our experience, the easier and easier it gets to distinguish truth from illusion. And eventually, this self-inquiry happens on its own. Soon after, you begin to find that nothing really makes you suffer much anymore. And there's actually many people who have transcended psychological suffering altogether. And if it's possible for them, it's possible for you. So here's the practical application of this teaching. The next time you find yourself in suffering, simply begin to question the nature of this experience. Look beyond the surface layer that the ego implores you to stay entangled with, and ask the question, who is really suffering from this? Can there be a sufferer apart from the thoughts which are creating it? The more you ask this question, the quicker you begin to move out of suffering and back into joy. And eventually, you don't even move into suffering to begin with. There is never suffering in reality. It is always generated by the mind. And so in every moment, we make the only choice that can ever be made. We choose between the truth and illusions, suffering or joy, sleep or awakening, heaven and hell. In every moment, we are free to choose what we prefer to see, and this is your great power. You are in control of your state of being and no one else. So next time you find yourself in a state of being that you don't prefer, simply ask, show me a higher way of seeing this. And slowly, the answers will begin to reveal themselves.